Hello, in this lecture we're going to start talking about the beginnings of English America. So last time we talked about the Spanish and Spanish colonial system, and this time we're going to bring in the British, and they're going to settle along the Atlantic seaboard. Okay, but before we do that, we're just going to get an idea of exactly when each one of these groups colonized. Okay. So the Spanish, as you can tell from this map, where they settled, mainly in like the Latin America, modern day Latin America area, Mexico, Florida, and the Caribbean. And the French and the Dutch are also going to be involved in colonization, and it gives a time period there, 1500s and 1600s. And they're mainly along these like coastal regions, or not coastal, but along water, mainly because of the fur trading. Okay, and the British, these are the ones that we're mainly going to talk about today. They begin to settle in the early 1600s along the Atlantic seaboard. Now you may, wonder, the English themselves were the last ones really to join the colonization game, mainly because of the very unstable monarchy that existed in England at that time. In particular, King Henry VIII, and of course his infamous beheading of all of his wives, including Elizabeth I's mother, Anne Boleyn. And when she did come to power, also known as the Virgin Queen, she restored Protestantism, so no longer was there Catholicism there. Okay, but England joins for these main reasons: for national glory and power. They believed trade would be, profitable for them. But there was also a population crisis in England. It was growing exponentially, and England is a very tiny island, so it had a difficult time with that too. So, regarding intermixing, and we did talk about this quite a bit when we talked about Spanish colonization. We talked about the caste system last time, or the casta system, and how they created a hierarchy, a social hierarchy of individuals and how their races mixed. So the Spanish, although they were reluctant at first to allow intermarriage, later on embrace it because they see it as key to conversion. Okay, the French and the Dutch from the get-go, they were very pro intermarriage. That's the way the Native American groups would bind tribes together before that anyway. And so the fact that they wanted a trading relationship, they felt that it was necessary, and they actually encourage it. So they encourage intermarriage, which actually makes it so the French and the Dutch have very strong relations with the Native American groups. The English, on the other hand, are going to be the group that really, really suffers. They're the group in particular that has ongoing issues with the Native American groups. Not to say the Spanish didn't and the French didn't, but specifically the English do quite a bit. They never think it's okay for intermarriage. Okay, the only time they do okay it is between John Rolfe and Pocahontas, and after that it was actually outlawed in a 1691 law, any kind of intermarriage between two races. Okay, they were mainly focused on like the Indians' land. They were not really focused on the Indians themselves. Okay, so we're going to skip this part here because that was part of my synchronous class there. But anyway, so the very first attempt at a colony was a colony known as Roanoke. And Sir Walter Raleigh in particular, he was very close to Queen Elizabeth. Actually, there were rumors that he was having a love affair with her. And he was married, and of course she was known as the Virgin Queen because she never did marry. But we do know that she for sure granted a charter to him to found Roanoke. He established it and brings like 100 settlers over. That's when Virginia Dare, the first person born in the colonies, the English colonies that is, was there. But in 1590, when he returns to come back and check on the colony, he realizes it's just completely abandoned. And the only thing that they find is that the words Croatan are etched on a tree. And that was the name of a local Native American group. And so there were two competing theories on what exactly happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. The first one was that they were massacred by all the Indians, but they didn't find any remains of them anywhere. The second one is the one actually that they seem to be proving more often, more lately, and that goes to, there's like been some recent anthropological digs and some recent historical information that on the island of Hatteras, where Roanoke, where the Croatian Indians were, apparently they found some remains and some evidence that the two groups mixed, so the English and the Croatans. And the fact that it was very difficult to settle there, they didn't know the land, that really to survive they needed the Native American help. That theory probably is really what happened to the Roanoke colony, but nothing's been confirmed since then. But officially, the very first colony that successfully, I say that in air quotes because I guess it depends on how you define successful, settles is in 1607 in the Chesapeake region. And the Chesapeake region, by the way, importantly, is located in Virginia, and it's called the Chesapeake region because it's along the Chesapeake Bay and along the Chesapeake River. But this was mainly settled for economic reasons, and they settle there because they think they're going to find gold. So they send 104 men, and having only men in the colony, that's obviously not going to work to sustain a colony. But beyond that, there were, issues from the very beginning. Malaria because of being right along the river. And on top of that, about half of the settlers were gentlemen, and they did not want to get their hands dirty. So they refused to do any kind of work at all. Okay, there was also a change in leadership, and that brought their own issues. Okay, so one of the ways that people came to the colonies, or 2/3 of the way that the people came to the Jamestown colony, was through something called indentured servitude. So essentially what indentured servitude is that, people in the colony or in Great Britain that wanted to come to the colonies but didn't have the money to pay for the passage, their passage was paid for by a wealthier person, okay, that needed some helpers on their farm, on their plantation. It was not quite a plantation yet at that time. But they agreed to pay their passage in return for a service contract of at least ranged between 5 and 7 years. Okay, so the idea was that after they fulfilled their contract, they would get what's known as freedom dues, and they would be given a certain amount of land and their freedom after their contract was fulfilled. So for a lot of people in England, this was very enticing because of the poverty that was in England and because of the idea of getting land. And at that time, land was wealth. Like, that is what defines you. And so this was kind of like a new beginning for them. Unfortunately for a lot of the indentured servants, the contracts were many times abused. They would find reasons to extend their contract. For example, pregnant women, if they got pregnant during their time of their service, that time was tacked on to the time they were pregnant was tacked on to their contract. And that was actually written in their contract also. But the scariest part about this is that it was so horrible in this area and so difficult to live on this land with at this time period, that the average lifespan once your foot hit the soil in Virginia was 4 years. And so, obviously, what does that tell you? That tells you that obviously you probably wouldn't live to see the end of your contract. Okay, so although it seemed like a very good idea, not very many people lived to see the end of it. So with their change in leadership, a man named John Smith, he was actually kind of turning the colony around. Those that don't work don't eat, and change the mentality of it. But unfortunately for John Smith, there was a minor explosion, and he injured his leg, and he went back in the summer of 1609 to England, and he came back a year later to complete devastation in Jamestown. And essentially what happened was that the colonists did not plan well enough. They didn't store their food. And when winter came, and it was a particularly harsh winter, the Jamestown settlers went and raided the local Powhatan Indians. So, they stole their food, they killed them. And so it came to the point when they couldn't even leave their compound because the Indians were retaliating for stealing their food and killing them. And so by the time the end of the winter was, the 400 people they started with, there was only 65 that remained. There is significant evidence, and I did put a video clip that I encourage you to pause and watch, but they talked about the fact that there is significant evidence. Well, we know for first they definitely ate rats and belts and their horses and things like that. They also started to dig up corpses and started to eat the corpses. So cannibalism occurred. There was even an instance where a guy killed his wife that was pregnant and ate her and then the unborn child. Well, actually, I think in the court documents he said he threw the unborn child in the river. Needless to say, he even stated that his wife tasted better with salt. So, yeah, pretty disturbing, but there was significant evidence of that. If you're interested in that, you know, I mean, I love forensic anthropology, and that's exactly how they found it, exactly what happened with Jamestown. But you can look up a book called Written in Bones by a man named Dr. Owensby. And he wrote all about that. He was in charge of like the Jamestown excavation. So I encourage you to read that if you're interested in that type of thing. So regarding Indian relations, the first 2 years of Jamestown, they actually strived to have pretty good relations. John Smith in particular was instrumental in developing a relationship with the Powhatan Indians. And after John Smith left, you know, John Rolfe, another man, came in to lead the colony. So Pocahontas' favorite daughter becomes like who is Powhatan's favorite daughter, becomes like an intermediary between the settlers. They kidnap Pocahontas in 1613, and while she's in captivity, she marries John Rolfe. And a lot of historians theorize that this was a common thing that would happen between tribes during this time period. And so the idea is that she intentionally was caught and intentionally would marry John Rolfe as a way to bridge relations between the two groups. But either way, whether or not it was love or just you know, binding between the two groups, she goes off in 1616 to England, and you can see this is the initial picture, or you know, imagine a couple imaginary pictures of what Pocahontas looked like. She in her own right was a princess, so it's important to think about that. Powhatan was a powerful leader, like a king of the entire group there. And his daughter, in turn, obviously was a princess. But she, this is what she looked like, you know, when she married, or what they imagine. This is how they changed her once she came to England. You can see that she's been very anglicized, and they even changed her name to Rebecca, a Christian name. She did die a year later of tuberculosis because she did not have the immune system to deal with all the diseases that were there in Europe at the time, sadly. Okay, so they changed the Virginia Company. They start to become a society because they realize that they're so physically far away from England that unless they run it and govern it themselves, it's not going to be able to be sustained. And so they create the House of Burgesses, which is America's first elected assembly, and so they have planters help make decisions of the colonies. They also developed something called the headright system. So this is kind of important. The headright system essentially said, for every person you bring to the colony, we will give you 50 acres of land. So obviously that's going to encourage people to pay the passage of indentured servants to come over, because the more people they brought over, the more land they got. And so that'll be key to like the plantation system later on. Okay, so at this point, Powhatan, the powerful leader, has died, of course. Pocahontas has died when she was in England. And now the brother of Pocahontas, who I'm not going to try to embarrass myself. I'm sorry, not Pocahontas' brother. It should say Powhatan's brother. He stages a surprise attack and kills 1,200 of the settlers, mainly because they realized that the English were there to stay. I think what a lot of the Native Americans felt and thought, because there had been English that had come many times before, and Europeans. They came to trade and they would leave. And they realized, these people are here to stay. They're not here to establish a trading post. You know, the Powhatans finally kind of uprise. And it was a slaughter. And in retaliation, the Jamestown settlers turned around and killed, you know, hundreds of Indians in their villages. At that point, the Virginia Company, which was a joint stock company, they gave up their charter. They had it at that point. They gave it to the Crown, and they officially pulled out of the Jamestown colony. So unfortunately for the Virginia Company, they left a little too soon, because the Jamestown colony started to become profitable because they started to use tobacco as a cash crop. And they begin to really profit from this. And of course, remember the Jamestown, the Virginia Company's out, and they begin bringing in, they start bringing in profits from tobacco. And you can see like how this really increases. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't become like this binding colony of people joining together like we will see in Plymouth. Instead, this becomes like a get-rich-quick scheme, and everybody's out for themselves. Okay? But I will tell you this, and obviously from like the Headright system, this is really attributed to this a lot. 120,000 of the Chesapeake area people that are settled, 3/4 of them come through indentured servitude. Okay? All right, so New England settlement. Now we'll start talking about the Pilgrims and the Puritans that come a little later on. But essentially, the Pilgrims come in early 1608, or actually they leave in 1608 to the Netherlands. Interesting side note about the Puritans or the Pilgrims: they flee England because they're not able to practice their religion, and they go to the Netherlands because they feel like they're going to be able to practice their religion freely. Well, it turns out that, when they get to the Netherlands, it was way too loosey-goosey for them. So they're like, yeah, we can't raise our kids like this. We need to form our own colony with our own belief. And they get funded by another joint stock company, and they travel to America to fund their own area. Now, interesting, so 102 settlers settle out. They leave and they go on this journey, and they initially were trying to go towards the Virginia area, but they get blown off course and they settle in the Massachusetts area. And before they leave the boat, though, they do sign, of course, famously, the Mayflower Compact, which was our first written form of government. Another interesting note, they spent their first winter on the boat because they get there in about November. They get there late because of the treacherous seas. And that's, of course, when they sign the Mayflower Compact. But they, kind of dabble in going off here and there. But they really don't come off until the winter is over in 1620. Now, they survive. Their colony actually is very successful with the help of an Indian called Squanto. Now, there's a lot of history and historians that theorize how Squanto came to be, but he definitely spent some time in England. He was taken back to England as an example, but somehow, and actually historians don't even know how he got back to, they have theories, but they're not exactly sure how he got back exactly to the area. But when he did, he becomes like a translator between the Indians there and the settlers, and he teaches them how to plant corn and teaches them how to survive. And of course, famously in 1621 in November, they have their first harvest, which was known as the first Thanksgiving. So that's exactly what Thanksgiving was. It was a celebration of the first year and successful harvest. Now, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is another group of Puritans, and they come in the 1630s through the Great Migration. Most of them actually go to the Caribbean and to Ireland. They flee England because of the persecution. They set up a whole society here, and they start settling towns in the Massachusetts area. The Plymouth colony is right here, so Massachusetts will be just this area here. They're all Puritans. But anyway, they do establish like Harvard College in 1636. And as you notice from this map, okay, if you kind of look at it carefully, this is essentially how they would set up all of their towns. And you can tell from looking at that the church and the town hall and the school, these were all extremely important because they're placed in the center of all the towns, and the homes are outside of it, and of course the fields and farms are surrounding that. So I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had another slide on this, but you can see this kind of carefully, and this is essentially how they would establish these areas. Okay, not everybody was happy with the Puritans, and one thing that you need to know about the Puritans is that they were very, they might have fled for religious freedom, but as soon as they got there, they began to persecute other people. So anybody that practiced differently than them, they were put on trial for heresy, and two of the most famous people were Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson. Roger Williams believed in the separation of church and state, did not believe that government and church should interfere. And for him speaking out against church leaders, they banish him. He goes to live amongst the Indians in the woods of Rhode Island for a while, until he later establishes the state or the colony of Rhode Island, which becomes like a religious beacon for people. Anne Hutchinson, she was a very famous dissenter. A dissenter is people that kind of speak out. And it was crazy that a woman would speak and hold these meetings, and that was like distasteful to the Puritans to begin with. But on top of that, she questions church leaderships. And because she was a woman and she spoke out against this, and because she questioned church leadership, she was placed on trial for sedition. She was banished. She goes to Rhode Island. Sadly, like a year later, her and her family were killed by a Native American attack. Okay, so that's it. That is all that I have for you guys. So I encourage you to make sure you look through this and let me know if you have any questions. Be sure to at least read the first few pages of the chapter, because between this PowerPoint and the introduction to Chapter 2, that will be what I make your quiz out of. All right, have a great day. Thank you. Bye.